Time show. Hello, everybody. My name is Hero Vincent, and I'm here simply to be a vessel of truth. The Black Caucus movement is a stage set from the relentless pursuit of systematic oppression of our people and the unwavering fortitude and desire to overcome it. We have invited leaders and warriors from all across our community to discuss the issues that restrict our advancement and put forth tangible yet radical solutions so that we may once again thrive as a people. With us today, I have the pleasure and joy of re-welcoming somebody who is very, very powerful, a young, powerful Black woman who is a journalist trying to shed light onto the dark narrative that the mainstream media tries to put upon us today. She is from RT America, and her name is Ashlee Banks. Hello, Ashlee. Also joining us, she has a master's in occupational therapy, and she works diligently to bridge the gap between the spiritual awareness and the physical awareness in our youth so that they know how to grow in a better space. She is the founder of New Era Creative Spaces, and her name is Ms. Ridvan Foxhall. Hello, Ms. Ridvan. How are you? Uh, and now with great power comes great responsibility, and this man has a lot of it. He is the advisor on the Great Oaks Charter Schools, and he is also the on the board of the Digital Interactive Communications of Port Authority. And so now he is a very powerful and blessed king, and I'm honored to have him on this show, Mr. E.A. Thomas. Hello, Mr. Thomas.
Pleased to
And
be here.
lastly, absolutely. Lastly, but not least, never least, he has worked almost his entire life to educate and to build the structure of our minds so that we can rebuild the infrastructure of our cities. He is a professor of social African studies at the Brown University. It is a pleasure and Mr. Professor Paget Henry. Thank you for being here, everybody. So, for all of you who are watching today, I appreciate and I thank you for tuning in. We are doing and that we have never done before. So, welcome to the movement. This is the Black Caucus. We are looking to engage on the topics of this panel. So, if you would like to leave your comments and your questions in the chat box, we have a team that is going to feed me those messages and those texts and those questions so that we can ask our panel today. So just go ahead, feel free to ask away. I want to start this giving a little story. I saw an interesting article the other day. It was everybody knows Dave Chappelle, right? Yeah, everybody knows Dave Chappelle. I hope so. So I saw an interesting story with Dave, and it was very interesting for me because he was talking about an incident that he had with police where he was pulled over. Everyone knows that he lives in Ohio, and he was pulled over by this cop. Cop walked up to his car just like every citizen will, petrified for his life, and told the officer asked him for his license and ID. Dave looked at him and said, "Okay, officer, I got it, but it's in my glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it nice and slow." The officer says, "Dave, I know who you are. Don't worry." And then he says, gives him a warning and sends him on his way. Dave says, "Well, then why did you ask me for my ID?" But he said that he was trying to enough. No, nobody. I dropped what? No joke. I just want to know that everybody has anybody heard that story?
We didn't hear it. There were some audio issues, so if you could try that again for us.
Oh, is that Ashley? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's Ashlee. We couldn't hear it. Yeah, could you just try and say that again? Repeat it for us, please.
Okay, I was just interested if everybody had heard the story of Dave Chappelle being pulled over by police. He was pulled by a cop, and that same cop 3 days later was the same cop that shot and killed John Crawford III. Has anybody heard that story before?
No.
No, I haven't.
No, I find it very interesting
No,
that none of see it's a powerful story because just 3 days Dave Chappelle got off, no well, but 3 days later that same officer right there in Ohio killed John Crawford III. I find it very interesting that we never heard that before, and I just want to keep that as we follow this discussion. So Ashlee, it's nice to have you back on the show. I'll be able to talk to you. Are you still in Minnesota right now?
I am. Yes, I'm still in Minneapolis right now.
Minneapolis. Yeah, Minneapolis. Awesome. I just wanted to ask you about the narrative that the media has been spinning about rioting and looting. In, as mainstream media, we see a lot of the conversation being about Black people and looting and rioting and how we should stop this and how it's not helping our cause. And I want to know, how is that narrative made on the ground? How does that really look? And is it an actual assessment of what's happening? Or
Oh,
is it,
yeah.
do you see like it actually having a negative effect on who are grieving right now in Minneapolis?
That's a really great question. So I was attending the memorial services for George Floyd yesterday at North Central University. And right before the services started, Master P was there. And Master P was talking to media. And he was basically saying, you guys are showing all the wrong things. You guys are showing what took place when it comes to looting, when it comes to the burning. And you guys need to show the whole story. You need to show people empowering one another. And so I thought that was perfect what Master P had to say, because when I first arrived here was about a week ago, and I've seen nothing but peaceful protests since I've been here. And a lot of the demonstrators were thanking me for telling a better part of the story, for showing that the community comes together, that these people are here for one another. And yes, looting took place. Yes, burning down of like buildings and the third precinct took place. But the officials, state officials, have said that a lot of what took place was from instigators, people who came from out of state, KKK members, not even people that are in the community. But when it comes to mainstream media will push the looting and the rioting because it gets ratings and it does take away from the message. But I think because this movement that's going on, not just here in Minneapolis, but around the world, it's like a revolution. And it's so massive that I think, regardless of what the media is portraying, it's still having the impact that's needed. Hero, you there?
Mm. Sure. I mean, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, uh, I would like to say that I wouldn't call this a revolution. I would call it an insurrection. And in both revolutions and insurrections, you are going to have violence because you are viscerally expressing your distaste, your hate for the everyday violence by which racism is institutionalized. That wherever you have a mass uprising, you're going to have this anger being expressed, and it's not going to be expressed in beautiful, orderly ways. Think of the uprisings in Paris, the yellow vests, earlier this year. We saw the same kind of activities among French workers, white and black, and they took on the French government for several days. So, while I understand that in movements like this, you always have some people expressing themselves peacefully, some others in more radical ways, and then some in more violent ways. I think that we have to take in the complexity of all of that.
Mm.
With the people who are violent, I think we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the meaning of that violence? Why
I,
were French workers violent? And now, why are some, call them protesters, here being violent? Now, I'm in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'll just say this, that all of the people who were arrested in Providence for being violent were from Providence, Rhode Island.
mm. I do want to touch on that a little bit, and I want to come back around because you made an interesting point. But first, you were talking about some of the pain and the reasons why we're becoming violent, and and so I wanted to touch a little bit. I want to talk to you, Ms. Rizwan, because you had made an interesting statement when we had our phone conversation, and you said something to me about racism is a disease of the soul. Could you go into depth about what you mean by that and how it applies to the anger and the pain that we're feeling when you see this type of violence?
Um, Thank you, Hero.
Mm.
Is my okay? I'm unmuted. Yeah. So the reason, we had a really great conversation the other day, and racism. What I was talking about, racism being a disease of the soul, is racism. It's a disease of the soul because really to combat racism, we have to see each other as one family, right? I have to see you, or a white person has to see me as their family, as one human family. And this idea, this concept of the oneness of humanity is something that, the inherent oneness, because Hero, when I see you, I see someone who is an individual who is born with nobility, right? So you have the potential to be, from when you're born, you have the potential to be the best human being that you can be. So if I see you less than that, if I don't see your true nobility, right, then I cannot treat you, in the way that you need to be treated. So when I say that it's a spiritual, and I also, what I said to you when we were speaking is that we need it's spiritual revolution, and we need to be talking about teaching our kids about empathy, teaching our kids to care about each other. There's a quote that says, "Let there be such oneness between us that when one cries, the other tastes salt." That is pretty profound. If we see each other and as brothers and sisters, and when one cries, the other tastes salt. That is how connected we as a human being need to become, so that we cannot bear to see another human being hurt. And I get it about the riots, because people are angry. People need some way to express how they're feeling, because this is not something that's just happened overnight. This is something that's been going on for hundreds of years, right? And what what media doesn't always show is that, is all the restraint that has been shown, right? Toni Morrison once said that what struck me most about those who rioted was how long they waited, the restraint they showed, not the spontaneity, the restraint. They waited and waited for justice, and it didn't come. No one talks about that, right? So Black people have been waiting for justice for so long. And before we can get to unity and oneness, we really have to talk about justice, right? We really have to talk and justice for all. And policies are important, but I really feel like there has to be a change of heart. This anti-Blackness ideology has to be stamped out of the hearts of people, because the policies will keep changing. And if we don't change
I want to stop you right here. I'm sorry to cut you off short. I apologize, because you're powerful. But in my ear, that there's something wrong.
So
with
I
the
can't hear
recording.
you right now.
Can you hear me okay? Is that okay? Hello?
I can hear you okay. Yes.
Yes. There seems to be a problem with the stream, with the recording. I'm not sure what it is. We've never had this issue before. I'm getting told in my ear that something is not recording. What's the problem? Liam? Liam, what's the problem? Liam, what's the problem? Liam, what's the problem? Okay, where's Jez? That's fine. As long as the main thing is being recorded, that's all that matters right now. It's fine. If I really just want to have the conversation with these guests, and they've given me their time, so I don't want to waste their time. So they're saying some very powerful things. So let's have it recorded. And so in my ear, I know that everybody wants to relay me messages and stuff like that, but I want to be able to focus on what they're saying so I can conduct this conversation. All right, so you guys in the background handle all that, but I want to facilitate the conversation. Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Rizwan.
That's all right. I forget where I was. What was I
You were
saying?
you were talking about the healing that needs to take place before we can actually move forward.
Yeah, I was talking a little bit about justice, that we really have to deal with justice, making sure that everyone is treated equally. But something I was saying when I said it was a spiritual revolution that has to happen, because I think it's important to have changes in policy. But as we can see over the hundreds of years, we've had policy changes to try to, in an attempt to solve the problem of racism. But racism will end when we change the hearts of men, right? It's because it's really a disease of the soul, I believe. And as long as we have people who, believe that Black people are inferior to them, then this problem will keep rearing its ugly head. And so as an educator, what I try to do is work with parents and work with children, because children are not born hating, different races. And I think that's where we really should start as an educator. That's my lane. Everyone is going to touch it at different, we'll be in different lanes working towards this problem, because we do need people changing policies, but we also need people to raise anti-racist kids. We need parents to teach their kids from day one, because if you are not teaching your kids to be anti-racist, you are raising racist kids, because they are being socialized by this ideology, this anti-Blackness ideology, by the media, by everything. It's in our school system, in education, in housing, in criminal justice, in healthcare. You know, there's so much implicit bias because this ideology is in the fiber of our society. So if we're not consciously teaching our kids about their inherent oneness and the inherent oneness of humanity and their inherent nobility, and learn to treat each other with love and compassion, if we don't do that, then our children are being socialized. White kids are being socialized that they're superior, and Black kids are being socialized that they're inferior. They're buying it because they're not teaching us our history in schools and telling us that, Black kids are not being taught that they come from some powerful people. We are riding on the backs of amazing human beings who went before us, who created a path for us. And we need to know this. So as an educator, that is what I try to do, is to educate. And I think that talking about breaking the chain, right? This is about breaking chains. I really feel like education is key, and educating about the real history
Before we
of this
go
country.
into the depth of that, because I do want to explore that some more as well, Ms. Ridvan. But I know that Mr. Thomas, we were on the phone earlier, and it's amazing how the conversation just easily molds itself to right now. There's a social there's a sociology saying that everything repeats itself after everyone that has gone through that experience has died, right? So like every 100 years, we see ourselves going through a pandemic. We see ourselves going through like this racial tension. Most of the people who have been alive at 1918 for the last pandemic aren't here to tell us what happened and how we got through it last time. Most of the people who went through the war or the Great Depression, they're not here to tell us how they got through it, or what happened, or what those scenarios. So we see ourselves here again repeating we see some of the same things that we saw in history all at once, really. And so we had a conversation, me and you, Mr. Thomas, earlier about um, we had a conversation about the time that it takes for us to be outraged, right? And the way that you framed it, it seemed to me like it was more a statement of the time that it takes to be jaded by the system, right? As I get older, I find myself not having the feeling of invincibility that I once had as a child, as a young idealist going out to protest and like, hey, I want to change the world, because I've seen the system and its ability to oppress me and set all these parameters in place that prevents me from succeeding in that goal. And I've seen it time and time and time again. But yet, I live in a different age from the civil rights movement. I have technology where I see more and more and more of that. Can you elaborate a little bit on on, on that discussion that we were having and how it pertains to the anger that people are feeling now?
Um, I think my POV on this was not as complex or as deep as it might have came off. But my understanding is this: that I know that there are people that have come before me and that have experienced this on the front lines. Um, and they were at different ages, whether they were in their 40s, I happen to be in my 30s, whether they were in their 20s, or whether they were teenagers in 1963 walking on Constitution Avenue um, with MLK. To that length, those same younger kids in their 15s, there are now our older folks that are seeing this now. And it's almost like deja vu, because this is exactly what was happening. Maybe not being hosed down, but being tased. Um, police officers from their car, um, eyes, which is kind of familiar to what they experienced in the past. But for me, I feel like there's a lot of trauma that's been passed down by generation to generation. So where for my generation, before getting to Generation Z, Generation Y, I'm dealing with learning about seeing 9/11 and going through that, and really just getting into the technology age at that point in time back in 2001. But I wasn't fully, immersed into tech at the age of 16, 17 during 2011, during 2001 for 9/11 attacks. And now we have our younger brothers and sisters who are Gen Y, born between the 90s and 2000 to 2010, that are not only hearing about it, seeing it, and it's also being carried with them on their phone. Gen Z is also very vocal about things, and they want to be heard. And they also have a right to be heard, especially in a world where information is not outwardly open towards people. And so I think what we're seeing here is a generation that had just as much fight as my generation or the generation that came before me. But now there are several different mediums about how they can communicate and or channel their anger, whether it be through vocal expression, physical expression, or through social expression. And so what I think we're seeing is that it's compound trauma that's taking place from what my grandmother might have seen to what my mother might have seen to what I'm seeing. And although I don't have a child, I could have very well had a child at this time. And then sharing that trauma to my child. And so each generation is passing off trauma, but the trauma that's being passed off is still being compacted because we never really got through it during our generation. And so now they're experiencing it on a whole nother level. So where my nieces are asking me questions about why is this happening and why she's so upset and why she's so frustrated, she's no longer being like held. And it's not like she can't see what's happening. She can see it on the news. Whereas in 1940, not many people did have a box set television, right? Where social media wasn't a thing. So the way injustice was being happened for Emmett Till, news couldn't travel as quick as it did for George Floyd, right? And so we're in a state where I can receive information quickly and I want to do something, but I don't even have a setup around me for me to really act in a way that I feel like it's impactful. So if I'm now learning about what has happened that's come before me and what the outcome is, and I'm all about the fight because I have information now and I want to be armed with the right information, you get to a space in time where you want to act out because you don't feel like speaking is working. And you've seen this happen for generation over generation. You heard the stories from your grandmother, you heard the stories from your mother, and now you're telling and your friends are talking about the stories what's happening now. So no one's going to keep doing what hasn't been working. And so the only times throughout history where progress has been made is when there is what we are calling a revolution or where there is an uprising, as they would try to, label it. And so I think it's disheartening to know that with this the best way that they can. And it's also like, okay, even if legislations are made today and legally laws are changed tomorrow, the trauma and the years that is taken for us to even get here to be expressive is not going to change tomorrow and is not going to cross over tomorrow. So for me, the conversation is, what is the process of the steps to not only changing legislation, but what is the process of stepping to how do we change the hope for tomorrow? How do we engage and really in a way that's kind of saying we're going to transition from this date to this date, as opposed to thinking that it's going to stop overnight, even if laws are passed, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. Well, if I could pose, is Ashlee still here? I can't see her on the.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, great. I want to pose that question to you. Since you've seen the dynamic of the crowds there, I believe they're mostly young, correct? You have a younger.
I would say 50-50, to be honest.
50-50?
Yeah, of course I've seen young people, but I would say what would you say is young? Give me your definition of young.
30s and down.
Okay. So I've seen people that are probably 60 and down, and I would say that's split.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in that dynamic that you see that people are, it's a good split. Is it predominantly people of color?
Being in Minneapolis, I would say
No.
at times I've seen mostly white people. Obviously there's a heavy Black presence here. But when you look at some of the protests, non-Blacks whites outweigh the blacks.
And how so with the looting and the riots?
With the looting and the riots, I wasn't here for that, so all I have to base on that is what I've seen in media, mainstream, those visuals. So I wouldn't go off of that.
That's
Um,
interesting. I was under the impression it was still happening.
See, yeah, it's not, and no one here is looting. No one here is burning anything, and that's why Master P said what he said, and that's why a lot of demonstrators who came to me were just thankful that I was covering the things that were really happening, the good things, and the things that media weren't showing. I told you last time I paid attention to local news when I first got here because I was like, let's see, what are they talking about? What have I missed? And it was just so skewed. So when I went to go speak to the demonstrators, they were like, yeah, we don't trust the media because the media isn't telling the real story. So basically, I guess looting and the lighting on fire of buildings took place or shortly after the video came out about George Floyd. That happened for about a day or two, and then it stopped. And so people, like I said, they're just peacefully protesting. And like every day, you'll see people of Minneapolis just walking the streets with brooms and just sweeping and trying to take care of their city. So it's like those are the things you won't see on TV. People coming together and just having a good time.
So I ask these things because I'm curious about the notion that Mr. Thomas had put forth was that we have to have an understanding that we are not going to get the things changed tomorrow.
Right.
But it seems that the people that are out right now, they're encouraged and they're motivated. But what is the end goal? What do they believe and what do they feel? Like how long do they have to be out there? How long do they have to continually protest? And is there a thought or is there any type of action being taken place to see these significant changes? Are they concerned about are are the people in Minneapolis concerned about all the people that are suffering the same things? Or are they concerned about immediate change within that space?
And that's a great question. I'll answer the last one first. So sure, we're not going to see change overnight, but these people aren't just protesting for George Floyd. They're protesting, as we know, for systemic racism, whether it be in the educational system, justice system, law enforcement, political system. And so it's been interesting. They've been protesting for what, about 9-10 days now, and they've actually seen immediate change. It's so crazy. The officers being arrested took some time once the new Attorney General, Keith Ellison, took over. But for example, law enforcement is no longer working with the Minneapolis public school system. The public school system cut its ties with the police force. As some of you might have grown up maybe in schools where you had resource officers. I know I did in middle school, and Black and brown kids are disproportionately arrested in middle and high school for just little things, and you already have a record before you're an adult. And so that was an issue in Minneapolis. So they cut ties. The Minnesota University cut ties. There have been at least 10 major organizations in the city that have cut ties with law enforcement. And city officials, or state officials rather, said that they're banning the chokehold, and that officers who are witnessing other officers engage in excessive force have to report it and intervene, or else they're going to be in big trouble. And so there are things that are taking place. And yes, it's just right now in Minneapolis, but other states across the country, they're taking down Confederate statues. They're moving along with this movement and trying to bring about change. And what he was saying earlier about like the mindset, it's going to be hard for that mindset to be done away with, obviously, because it's ingrained in a lot of to racism. But when it comes to taking down some of the tangible things, those things are changing. I'm not going to say they're going to change everywhere, but Minneapolis are seeing some change.
Blessings. Yo, we have really started on a very interesting topic, and this I wanted to explore. I opened the door for this conversation to happen by having these different voices on this platform, and I just want to thank you all for joining me here. I have a few agenda points that I want to get to because the voices that we have today, I see that you guys have now probably understood that you have a very similar background or some very similar voice in the things that you see within our orbit, within our space, and within our reality. Like some of the things that are plaguing us, some of the issues that we need to correct in order for healing to take place and us to move forward and to build a better community and a better society. And I felt like including all of your voices on the same platform and the same panel was going to come up with some of the solutions that were going to get us there. So I wanted to, I have a few agenda points, but a lot of what you're saying, um, I don't want to steer too far from the agenda from breaking the chains because it seems like the chains are mental and not as they're economic. Yes, we know that they're economic, but there are some mental chains that we need to break, and there's some spiritual chains that we need to break. And I want to explore how we can break those chains and the correction officers that are placing those chains on us, that are watching us stay in the cage. So I wanna talk to you, Dr. Henry, about as I watch the media and as I think about some of the stories that I'm hearing today, and I pose this to all of you first. This question: does it not seem that the last month was particularly extra racist? Did anybody feel that way? We know that this the statistics. We are desensitized to the statistics. Every time we see a black person die in the street, we're like, another one. We feel it. We're like, it hurts for a good couple days, and we're like, well, how long? You know what I'm saying? How long we got to keep seeing this, and how long we got to feel this? But this past month, we saw Breonna Taylor. After what was it, a month? We didn't hear anything about that until it came out. For Ahmaud Arbery, it was 2 months until we heard that story. And we know, and Ashlee, you can speak to this as well, that most of the media that we have here in the States are controlled by 6 different companies or 6 different people, right? So all the media has an agenda except for the independent media. So if we are at a place where these stories are elevated at a very specific time, Karen in the park, all these different things are happening. They push to our emotions, right? We have the ability to see these things on our phone and our television, and it's fed to us day in and day out, that energy. And then we feel this pain, we feel this aggression, we feel this anger, and then we go out the streets and we riot and we do this, we do that. Is there is Are we being used as a tool? And I pose this to
that we need to be aware of the history of our struggle. And, I think we have to grasp the fact that when we struggle, when we achieve, it doesn't mean that there won't be a counter struggle, an attempt to reverse the gains that we achieved in our struggle. And so I think a good way to think about what we are going through is to reflect on the major goals of the civil rights and Black Power movements. Now, if we look at these movements, all right, and there were many responses to racism in the 1960s and 70s. We had those who were revolutionary socialists, right, such as the Black Panthers.
mm,
We had those who were Black nationalists, right?
right,
Those who wanted Black separation, give us a separate state, the Black Muslims, right? Then there were those who were for reparations, right? All of these were solutions that were being proposed and backed by various groups in the 1960s. Now, as the movement got stronger and stronger, what happened was, and in particularly after the assassination of Martin Luther King, that the federal government chose to support the program of integration advocated by the SCLC and Dr. King. Out of that came the Voting Rights Act, right? The Civil Rights Act, and the policy of affirmative action, right? So, of all the solutions that were on the table, the one that was chosen was integration through affirmative action. Now, what happened, right, was that after 13 years of affirmative action, the program was unilaterally ended without any replacement, right? So in 1978, following the Bakke case, this policy that emerged from the SCLC's version of integration ended. Then, by the time Ronald Reagan and Spiro Agnew became president and vice president, what we got was the policy of color blindness. That all of a sudden, America was colorblind, that the country no longer saw color, right? And by this time, what we actually had, instead of real color blindness, what we had was a systematic attempt at reversing the achievements of the civil rights movement. I'm sure you can remember the attacks, systematic attacks on the leaders of the civil rights movement. I was living in Charlottesville, Virginia during this time, and I can remember I banked with a bank that absolutely refused to recognize Martin Luther King's birthday as a holiday. I went in the bank. What they did, they renamed it Robert E. Lee Day. All right. So you had this strong pushback coming from the Deep South, right, against the goals and all of the figures, major figures of the civil rights movement, right? And this pushback, this attempt to reverse the achievements of the civil rights movement is the project that is still on right now. All of these attempts to suppress Black voting, right? This is all part of this attempt to reverse the goals of the civil rights movement. Now, I want to just mention one figure here that many people have forgotten, and it's this Senator Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, right? An open white supremacist, right? George Wallace, open white supremacists, right? When Reagan got reelected, and he and his vice president, Spiro Agnew, they were the ones, Spiro Agnew was the individual who began this process of talking to George Wallace, Strom Thurmond, Jesse Helms, open white supremacists, to bring them back into the mainstream of the Republican Party. And so what we've had since 1980 is this attempt to bring the Deep South and the far right back into the mainstream of the Republican Party. This has driven America to the right. And what this means, literally, is that there has got to be smaller and less room for African Americans. That you cannot have Southern white supremacists being part of the governing alliance of this country, and it does not result in African American oppression. Ruling class in the North, hard times for Black people. Times. Notice the times when there have been real change. You have real change when the federal government is actually using its military might to contain the South. That's the
Are
only
we
time.
talk?
That's the only time we've had real change.
What kind
Black
of
people in the
change
United
are
States.
we talking about when we're talking about the real change from the military intervention? What kind of change? Yeah, it might have stopped some things from taking place, but what kind of change? Because I would argue that maybe we're still here, and maybe it shifted into a more technologically sound slavery.
No, no, no. I wouldn't put it that way. I mean, the civil rights movement achieved real things, right? I mean, the
Mm,
South was segregated, right? And
right.
you really have to think about what that meant, right? Uh, you know, as you know, I'm sure you've seen the pictures. White water fountains, black water
Mm,
fountains, white
right.
schools, black schools, all unequal. What the civil rights movement achieved was the transformation of that, right? So the institutional presence, the institutional supports of segregation, right, was what the
Mm,
civil rights movement achieved, right, in terms of dismantling. Now, to dismantle segregation was not to end racism, right? So let us
right.
not belittle the achievements of the civil rights movement. The dismantling of the Deep South was a real achievement, but
Mm,
it did not end racism. So, because the South, as it did after Reconstruction, fought back, right?
mm,
They fought back. And so they are now back as legitimate members of the party of Lincoln. Right?
mm. Well,
And when they are in power, all right, this is what you're going to get. So, for example, white nationalist groups, white supremacist groups, look at how they have grown and flourished. Right?
mm,
And they have become a voice, a legitimate voice on the American political scene, right?
yes,
Uh,
nationalism.
they were in hiding for a while, but now somebody like David Duke, all right?
He has a platform and a voice.
There you go.
I have a question about I have a question about that sort of healing. You wanted to say something, yeah? Mr. Thomas? Mr. Thomas, you're on mute. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
I absolutely understand the positioning of where he's coming from, and I understand that mindset. And as he spoke, what started turning in my mind is like, is segregation was something that you can actually see, right? There were black toilets, white toilets. Can't sit in this restaurant. You can see it, you can experience it. Where racism is almost a mindset or a feeling, because you could be taught racism versus not. So, and then he also just mentioned, like, you now have people that maybe they weren't as vocal in the past about their feelings on racism, and maybe they are from the deep South, white or what have you, versus back then where they weren't. And so, like, for me, the most important thing about me, and for me as a 36-year-old man at this time, is how can I make impactful change that's more within my society, in my community, right? And so the reason I say that is because through all the actions I've noticed that have taken across history, it starts within a smaller community, and then it branches out, and then it has the ability to do more. And so in my positioning, it's like, I can, yes, as a citizen, I have a right to vote the right people into office. I have a right to go to my town halls. I have a right to start petitions to get legislations or laws amended or changed. And those are my rights, right? And I have a right to try to change the narrative and elect who I need to get into office. There's also the reality conversation of, how do we as a people, and I think we're doing it now. I think the best thing that we're getting out of this is that we're actually starting to understand how to activate. And regardless if it was protest driven, silence protest driven, our biggest, outside of us protesting on the front lines, putting our lives in danger, both white, black, young women. I honestly can say, if I was a father of a young child, I don't know if I would bring my daughter on the front line, because the reality thought of me as a black man would be, if a white officer approaches me and there's a white man and his white daughter, there's a 50-50 chance, not even 50-50 chance, there's a 60% chance that I might be accosted or hit or batoned or handcuffed, right? And so there's also that disparity that of me as a black man, knowing that I'm not going to say target, but I'm the more likely person to go and be picked on at a protest, whether if it's a police, whether if it's a white supremacist or whatever the issue is. So I try to look at other ways I can incite change from my home, or from going to the polls, or from going to the town halls, or from supporting the petitions that are going around. And so for me, if I'm thinking about breaking through, I'm not going to get caught up in what I know to be true, that there is, like, one hand is faster than the other. I'm not going to let you see what the right hand is doing versus the left hand. We're going to give you guys this, but we're not going to give you guys that. The NFL now being up in arms and supporting us in ways that they never did. But when Cal Kaepernick just wanted to put a knee down, it was the biggest thing. And now everyone is willing to put a knee down. But this happened 4 years ago, right? And so our efforts today, we may not even see it until another 3 years from now. But the only thing that's important about Kyle's conversation is that Kaepernick didn't take off from the day he decided to put his career on the line, right? So I believe what we are doing now, how we are protesting, how we are engaging, how we are collectively coming together, how we are creating hashtags to gain over 25 million impressions and images, whether all black screens or not. We still have the capability to do that, and only being 14% of the whole United States, right? And so we do have the support, and there's other ways that we can come together and we can make movement happen. We can impact change. For the first time, and me coming back from an advertising background, all brands across the board are in support of this. So impact has happened. What's important for me is how do we take this impact? How do we make it consistent by quarter, by year? So next year, this time, we knew what happened this year, but here's how we're moving forward, and here's the work we've done because of what happened. Just like the civil rights movement brought along segregation, that was the post, even though racism didn't change. I'm not sure what we're doing today will change racism. But I do know that states like Minnesota are doing something that states nowhere in our land has ever done before, right? And so that's the first step, right? Unfortunately, it continues to take sacrifice from our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our fathers, our brothers, and we are sacrificing continuously to make these things happen. However, these sacrifices are not being done in vain when we march, when we petition, when we push the the status quo. And I could talk about all day about what happened in the past, and I could fixate on all the things that are happening, but I'm more passionate about how do I take this leverage and make it consistent? How do I make this a thing for all schools from age 6 up until high school, that this is a part of curriculum? This is not an elective. This is not a once a month year. This is something that we practice. So that way, our next generation that's coming up after Generation Z are not going to be the ones passing this down, right? And so if you have cops that were baby boomers passing it down to Generation X, passing it down to Generation Y, down to Z, it's still the same thing, the same mindset, even though not the same people or in the same living, right? So you change the mindset of the future by planting the seeds early. And I think we were able to come onto a farm, which is the United States. I think we really started to overturn the dirt right now, right? Now I feel like what we need to do is plant the seeds and make sure while we plant the seeds, we come back and we water it and we keep the conversation going. We all need to turn to some way and be a Kaepernick where he maintained his conversation, even though he sacrificed his career, but his conversation became very full relevant for organizations that thought he was outright wrong and are now in full support of not only him, but also the things that are happening. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I kind of have a mind that drifts, and it goes down these very long, lengthy, esoteric thought processes, which can be very dangerous because I can slip down a cycle of what's likely to happen because I read my history and I watch the things that are happening currently, and I say, okay, what's most likely to happen, and I do this kind of sense making, like why would this happen and why would that happen, and what does it mean if I'm seeing it, if I'm paying attention and I react to it. So I have questions really about, we had seen Kaepernick do this. We had seen Kobe put on the t-shirt. We had seen all these memes and stuff of peaceful protests. And now, and those brands nobody stood before us to make these changes happen then. Why do we feel that there's a difference now in taking these actions? And I'll pose that to Ashlee. I'll let her take a jab at it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to give my opinion. Obviously, I'm a journalist.
Yeah.
I want to piggyback off of what I believe is Thomas was saying. Kaepernick stuff. News just broke that Roger Goodell was saying that he apologizes and the NFL was wrong for not supporting Kaepernick. And
at the same time, there were like 8 teams that supported the Trump campaign, which sounds a little bit funny, right? And so all this stuff is coming out, but it's like,
why are you protecting your brand? Are you protecting your franchise? Right. You're afraid that you're going to lose the support of African Americans.
Right.
That's
what it comes down to. And what's really great out of this, and like I said, we always end up losing something to gain something, and that's unfortunate. And that's the biggest gripe. This is no doubt, in my time, one of the most strongest feelings I've ever seen come out of the US, not only just from my community, but from communities all around. I have always been witness and to other countries that go through this, whether they're be in Iraq, whether they're in Southeast Asia, and they're fighting for their lives. It looks like a complete war zone. To see that actually happening here in the US, this is, it's unfortunate. This is what it has to come down to, or this is not what it has to, what it came down to, right? Because we didn't ask for this. This was reactionary based on something that took place against us. So at the same time, I rather ride this wave and create more additional change for this than to wait for another reactionary period to come down the line 4 years from now, which will be catastrophically worse because it keeps escalating more and more and more. And so that's why I see the greatest change out of everything that's happening are the measures that Minnesota is taking. And you know, and doing all these changes and erecting these laws. And granted, it's not every state is going to jump on the bandwagon, but sometimes you need that one person that's going to step out and go against the grain to get two, to get three. It's just like Kaepernick's mission. He didn't get all the NFL teams after 2 years, but he got a handful. And God bless his soul, and him being a man of foresight. I'm not. And those that really needed to see him went and saw him. But you have to feel like at some point in time, there's, regardless of what the agenda is, regardless of what the system is, me as a Black man, my agenda is to ensure that anyone who's around me does and is able to reach their fullest potential, right? Regardless of where you come from. You can be Black, but that doesn't mean that you're African American. It doesn't mean that you're from Nigeria. It doesn't mean that you're from Jamaica. I can go on about the list, right? So we have plenty of diversity within the Black diaspora as it is. So for me, I'm more focused on how can I Kaepernick myself up to another situation? How do I stand fast in this experience, whether it did me well or not? But how do I carry this and I continue pushing it? Are we going to create curriculum in New York State or in any other state that deals with this and how to fight it? We're seeing other people, not Black, but other white young ladies that are having conversations with their parents that are going through social media. And to see this young lady go against her parents, which in my time, I'm like, would I ever go against my parent? If my parents said something, I probably wouldn't.
Right.
But to see that happen, right? So I can't say what happened in 1963 on Constitution Avenue will be what will happen on 42nd Street on January 6th or June 6th or whatever date. What I can say is that the emotions that came from that and the change that came from that are the emotions and the changes that can happen and are coming from that. And so I'm more focused on Ashlee's positive and insightful and wants to make change. So are the people on this call. How do I activate with you guys and partner up? And then while you guys are in your states, how do I go find out and go start on my own pyramid, like get things right and start pushing this knowledge and change forward? I want to take what I've learned these last few months outside of COVID and hit the ground running and be impactful immediately, right? I don't care if it's a shirt at a time. I don't care if it's a conversation at a time, but my conversation is not for the government right now. I need to rally and bring my people together and say, yo, guys, I know we're going through something, but how do we change what's happening here? And even if it happens in a small city before it breaks out into a town, before a state, then so be it. But let's have these conversations now. Let's change our community so these conversations are inclusive and we're getting a full understanding of the breakdown, because I've seen so many different cultures go through their bit of what it is to be segregated or experience these things, that the conversation is not only relevant to our community, it's relevant to all communities that are not from the United States. And for this to happen in the United States, where we're supposed to be a melting pot, it's not melting our way, or maybe the fire is not under our side of the pot.
That's the exact reason why I feel like
that. And what's that?
That's the exact reason why Black Caucus movement is here today, is because we want to kind of build a structure in which, yeah, we want to help everybody, And this is going to draw me into a question for Ms. Rizwan. We want to help everybody, but we want to create a platform that uplifts and elevates the Black community first. And everything you see done here, and everything you see that we organize and create here, and build and invest in here, you can take these tools and repeat them in other parallel minority groups, you know. And so if we can build this, and we can have these conversations, and we can do these talks and discussions and organize as smart intellectual leaders, then other people outside can not only change the conversation of how we are looked at and portrayed in the media, in mainstream, but also how other minority groups see us and portray us. But something that I want to be cautious of, and I need to explore it myself, and I'm hoping that with this conversation I want to challenge you a little bit, because I do see the opportunity for us to grow in this, obviously, because we have this platform right now, and it's building and it's growing. So there is an opportunity here in this space, in this world that we look at. But I want to be cautious that we're not making the same mistakes that we are in the past, by forgetting and ignoring the things that had already happened in the past, that gave us this sense of appeasement, that there is progress, that there is change, and so that we don't fall back in the same thing. So we take those hints and we take those notes from the things that did change from the past, but also we got to say this is what we were missing, so that we didn't have those same mistakes. And so I wanna be sure that there's nothing missing within our next steps, within our next forms of growth, right? And Miss Rizwan, we were talking about a spiritual revolution, right? And before we can have a physical one, we have to have a spiritual one. And for me, the spiritual one is the discernment. It's to be able to see when we're being lied to, right? It's to be able to see when there's money involved, there's greed, I believe evil is something that just speaks, and it always exists. It's not that people are born in evil, it just whispers in people's ears, and we sell our souls piece by piece, one part at a time, right? And so it's not somebody who is, eventually they become a monster, they become heartless and soulless, and they have the ability to put their knee on somebody's neck and be there for 9 to 10 minutes and have no type of gripe about it. That comes from selling your soul piece by piece, coming close to it, right? And so what is it that, if anything, are we missing anything right now, having this conversation, talking about the growth and about how we can come together? Or is there something missing, and how do we inject that spiritual revolution into the conversation, and to the transition into creating something new? I know that's a
So
very
I, in response to that, it's exactly to what you're saying. It's if someone knelt on someone's right. You've got to. There's no empathy. There's deadness of dead. It's like the soul is dead for that to happen. So we can address policies and everything, but we need to start addressing. How do people get to this stage where you can do that? I haven't watched that video, and I can't, because it breaks my heart. And what are we doing in schools? We have removed we've removed teaching kids about morality and about ethics and about spirituality. And I'm not talking about, one religion or the other religion, teaching kids about religion, but about spirituality, about the virtues that make us human. So often I see people who are like, we live in a society that is so individualistic. We don't teach we keep teaching competition and individual at the expense of everyone else. And that has to change, because we will keep producing people from our, educational system or from our society that are so hell bent on their own progress. And so this spiritual revolution I'm talking about is seeing each other as family, seeing each other as brothers and sisters. And for me, you know, what's happening with the pandemic and what's happening with, you know, the death of George Floyd is, I feel like a portal has been opened, right? There's a portal because there's something different, you know, and I, for one, I am trying to turn my anguish into action, right? And I think that's what we need to look at this opening, and we need to start to think about action. So in my community, we had a call to the youth this past week on Monday, and to talk to the youth about social justice, and we had 37 youth that showed up on our virtual meeting, and we had a really deep conversations. The youth are on fire, and they want to do something, right? And I think this is our opportunity to channel that energy into action, you know. And not just that, you know, talking to parents, for instance. I've been talking to a lot of white parents who are calling me because, you know, I work with parents, calling me and asking me, what should I do? So you know, there are people, I think there's a change, there's an awakening, and we should take action, and we should encourage people. And there are people, so I'm talking to people about where they're spending their money, because, you know, Black businesses are in trouble right now. To do so, I'm saying, okay, support Black businesses, support Black organizations, put your money where you want to act, you know. So people are asking for what can we do, and I think this is a great opportunity for us to seize and channel people into action, because I know my friends who are white want to do something, you know. So I am personally directing them, and I'm talking to them about talking to their kids, having these deep conversations with their kids, teaching their kids the history, you know, teaching your white kid how to treat my kid, right? And how not to treat my kid. So these are the things, these are the ways in which we can start to these conversations and start, you know, to encourage, empower, you know, channel our energy, channel our anger into action.
We take that doesn't feed into the same system. Actually, Dr. Henry, you teach sociology, so this is something that will definitely be down your lane of expertise. But how do we create this progress without feeding into some of the same tactics of game theory? I'm sure I'm sure you're familiar with game theory and the power game of
Sure.
power.
Mhm.
In that transition. So how do we create these spiritual structures and these spiritual organizations without feeding into the idea of these institutions and these corporations that already have put out scientists and put out all these articles and this literature meant to distract us and meant to create these fields of distraction, right? When it comes to, we see it on protests, we see it in media, we see it in our schools when they teach the wrong history, we see it when they talk about the wrong story about why we are out protesting in the first place. It's all rioters and looters. We see that in the media. So it seems like it's an agenda, and it's shifting. So it's meant to destroy us. How do we create a system? How do we create systems that is going to inject a more spiritual awareness and give us this discernment without feeding into the ideas of this transition of power? How do we do that?
Well, as I said, I really think that one has to remain rooted in the history, the amazing history of Black struggle in this country. That what Black people in this country have done is truly amazing. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we have not won the victory that we want, right?
Right.
We've made substantial progress. There has definitely been setbacks. And we have to then, first of all, realize that our goals, our basic goals towards racial equality have not changed. We may disagree on the strategies that we want to use to achieve these goals, but we're all, I think we're still committed to these basic goals. They, we have to,
Which are what?
huh?
Which are what?
Racial equality. We want racial equality, right? That is, we want on the most fundamental level, Black people to be recognized as members of the human family. Second, we want to be able to have our basic rights: the right to vote, the right to a decent education, right to health care, right not to be beaten up by the police. These are all things that we want. These are what we mean by racial equality, right? And as I said, we, in the 60s, we removed the ogre of segregation, that massive institutional structure that was built around the law. It was illegal for a Black person to go to X beach, illegal for them to go to X place, and that sort of stuff, right? That's the big victory that we
Okay,
want.
it seems like it's a good victory to have to be able to go places where we haven't been able to go before. I
But no,
I can't deny.
let me finish. You see,
Mhm.
because I think we haven't, fundamental question we haven't asked ourselves is what should be the next step? What
Right.
do we want to do? Having looked at the strategies that we use to win that victory, how do we regroup? What new strategies we have to employ to get to the next level? Now, the way I see it is that one of the things that the civil rights movement did not achieve was building a Black economy, that Black economic development was not a problem, not an issue that the civil rights movement solved, right? When we get all of these statistics, right, they just announced that 2 million new jobs was just created, and that the unemployment rate dropped from 16% to 13%. But Black and Hispanic unemployment actually increased. Okay? So we have an economic problem. And this is why I say the rage that came out in people attacking very specifically places of business has everything to do with this economic problem. There is economic injustice in this country, and it has been increasing since 1980. That the whole program of neoliberalism put together after 1980 has been a program that has increased income inequality in America, right? Probably like never before. And one of the costs of this whole neoliberal program has been the massive exporting of jobs overseas to China, to Korea, to Mexico, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
One of the major victims, I would say disproportionate victims of this new economic policy have been African Americans. Right?
Mhm.
And you cannot separate the policy of mass incarceration from the program of neoliberalism. If there was not mass incarceration, the economic statistics on Black unemployment would be much higher. There is a systematic connection between the loss of jobs in Black communities. Blacks turn into the sale of drugs to survive because there was no thought out economic program, no thought out program of developing Black economies as the whole industrial sector was being exported abroad, right? And so people are going to find a way to hustle, right? And so, as a matter of fact, right after the civil rights movement began to collapse, right? You can look at it, the rise in crime statistics. The correlation is there, unmistakable. As a matter of fact, a lot of whites began calling the rise in crime Black capitalism. Right?
Right.
So we have an economic problem. And I would say this is a moment where we should say, look, the civil rights movement was a great movement. It achieved a lot. It dismantled segregation, but it did not solve Black economic problem. It did not solve the kind of economic discrimination that Blacks experience in job markets, in education, et cetera, et cetera. This has got to be the new challenge, right? We need you see, to me, this is a very important moment because it's an insurrectionary moment. People are rising up and demanding. They are defying, right? Curfews. They are standing up to troops. I mean, when you look at what it has taken to contain this insurrection, 31,000 National Guard troops backing state police and city police. This is the power of this insurrection, right? This is what it took to stop it, right?
So do you think that this, because of these particular actions, uh, is there something that we should worry about because there's such a great resistance to this insurrection or this transition? Is
Well,
it something that we should worry
yeah,
about? And if so,
well, of course. Now, whenever you try to make a change,
Yes.
absolutely.
So yeah, thank you so much. I apologize for interrupting, but I do have to leave. So I just want to leave with this. I really feel like this is we're in a special time, and I am hopeful because when I see the youth and I see people coming out and protesting, and I hope we don't stop just by protesting and we turn this into action, because I'm all about action, right? So I want to leave with this quote from the Baha'i writings that says, "The light of men is justice. Quench it not with the contrary winds of oppression and tyranny. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity amongst men." So in order to get to unity, there has to be justice. And I really hope that we all, in whatever sphere that we live in, we work in, and that we work for justice, whether it's in education or health, in the media or the press, or whatever avenues we find ourselves, that we really work for justice. And we will get to unity, but we really need to right now deal with justice. And justice is hard and thorny road, as we can see. But I am hopeful, and I feel like we are making, humanity is moving forward. And ever so often, things like this, moments like this, kind of push us forward. So I hope we all continue to work in our sphere of influence to bring about justice.
Well, we absolutely have you now, and we have the opportunity to continuously work together and to formulate these ideas and to put action toward building this better infrastructure and this better system so that we can grow and find justice for all. So I hope that we can continue to work together and investing in your projects, and whether it be in with energy or financially. So if you can go ahead and plug your school, New Era Creative Spaces.
Yeah, so New Era Creative Space is an educational enrichment center in Peekskill, New York, and we are dedicated to inspiring social change through creative programming. So, and really, NECS is a mission-driven organization. We see the potential in each child, and we really use programming as a tool to help them live to their highest potential. So we can be found at necs.org online, and we're on Instagram, New Era Creative Space, and Facebook, NEC Space. And please support our organization in whatever way you can. Volunteer, donations. We work with a lot of Black and Brown children, and we are very much about leadership and empowering young people to earn, to go to school, to just be the voice of positive change in the world. And the future, we need to create a better future for our children. And we can't wait. We need to do it now. So if you can support us in any way, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Ridvan.
Doctor, and for elevating me to doctor. Now I have something to aspire. I'll have to go back and get my PhD. You take care, and I will be talking to you soon.
Absolutely. We're going to have some more conversations about building things together and building platforms. So I appreciate your time and your energy here.
Thank you.
Blessings
and thank
to
you,
Ms.
everyone.
Foxhall.
It's been wonderful. Take care.
Absolutely. I do. I want to go into a little bit.
I did want to just.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
In reference to, I keep forgetting his name.
Henry, Professor Henry.
Professor Henry.
Mm-hmm.
I want to respond to you, Professor Henry, from my perspective, and two reasons. One, I actually understand your perspective, your mindset, because as you said, history is so important. So I understand that. But I also feel it's important for me to just share in general, me as a Black man and my perspective. I definitely wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth or anything like that. I come from immigrant parents. I went through the gauntlet, and but I was very passionate about doing better than my parents did when they first came here. And they raised us with a spiritual mindset as well. At this point in time, although I understand a lot of the aspects you're talking about, Black economy and what that really means, and are getting our fair take, for a culture that inhabits 14% of the land that it lives in, which we are outpaced by many others, our spending is not reflective of that. To put it in broader strokes, if we take hip hop culture and you ask anyone in this room, and we all work together to name all the most relevant people in our time, from oldest to youngest, honestly, it can fit in the average household. In a 3-bedroom household, you can probably fit some of the most prolific hip hop artists. But however, the amount of wealth they've accumulated can cover several households, whether Black or white. because that's an accomplishment that I'm completely proud of, knowing that none of this wealth doesn't date back to nothing later than the 70s or the 80s. This wealth is new wealth, right? We're talking about 30 years worth of wealth. We're talking about not even 30 years worth of wealth. Maybe 96, 97, people started really coming to funding who are hip hop artists that we do know, like Jay-Z's and so forth. 97, 2000, and they worked hard to get to where they are. On the community front, before I go into statistics numbers, I just want to be very direct in what I'm saying here. I feel like community outreach and local community centers are an important start. People like myself, yourself, are able to go into these community centers because they want the volunteers to be able to not only educate, to show, to help people learn, and to also help them direct in a new way. Being active in the community, whether you're in New York City, I know personally there are tons of parks where I can start being active, and I'm not only going to meet my own kind there, I'm going to meet other people there. But at least I'm in the community and I'm able to bring my brothers with me. Voting within my community. Voting within my community, meaning not being an absentee ballot, not being an absentee voter and voting in another state that I had known nothing about, making the conscious effort to vote in the town where I reside, even though I'm away for a couple of years. Creating legal educational programming, meaning showing children, younger folks, how to be educated from a legal standpoint, whether financially or how to be in the right side of the law from an education standpoint based on your zip code when you're walking outside. Just basic understanding, because a lot of people don't even know that. And the reality is a lot of people don't even know who is running for office, mayor, trustees, or anything. So just being educated on the smallest levels, right? Petitioning on the smallest levels enacts greater change. Organizing Black economy that supports, meaning that I know that the Black economy is there. It is prevalent. We outpace categories for other people in different things. We're organizing Black economy in the sense of if there are other Black people that are doing really well in the economy, come back to a community that needs your education in terms of how to invest. What does an annuity mean? How do you buy a home? What kind of credit score do you need? Why is it important not to jump into a credit card system when you get into college? Those are the educational values that we need to impose on the ones that are coming up after us, because the more they know, then the better they are able to fare when they're out in the real world. There's nothing worse when you're not fully educated, when you're not financially literate, and you're still dealing with injustice from a systemic and a system standpoint. Whether your parents is part of Brooklyn's redlining and you managed to make your way out, to your parents being an immigrant, or to your parents being a descendant of actually a slave family, right? The educational value of that is completely necessary. Investing in Black banks. After all this had happened, it was always a thought when Nipsey Hussle brought it through, but I never took it seriously. I took it seriously this week. So seriously that I know that Carver Federal Savings Bank in Harlem at 75 West 125th Street is open 5-6 days a week. And this Monday, I'll be going to open an account there. I may not transfer all my funds over, but those are real impactful changes, because once I have it, I can show it.
I would say, what is the? Are you trying to challenge what he was saying?
What I'm challenging, and not even challenging, I'm adding on to it, or please see a different side to what your side you're seeing, because I don't think no side, but there are other ways or other mediums to get his points across to our generation still in this very time that we are not behind the ball.
Well, I would say he didn't really.
This is not an indictment, right? This is
I think you guys are kind of saying the same exact thing, because
exactly. But I'm saying it so my culture can understand it and digest it as well, because I understand his mindset. But I'm concerned about Generation Z seeing this and seeing if they understand or are able to digest it. And so I want to break down what great knowledge is to understanding, because everything he said is everything that I said, but I want to make it digestible and consumable for everyone that's going to understand this and see this, because not everyone's going to have the foresight and or the background education. And so I say that with an open heart, because I found education hard, because growing up in a Haitian household, learning English isn't the easiest thing. When you're speaking French, Creole, and then there's English. So you're talking about that's just happening. That has nothing to do with racism. That's not being treated wrong. I'm just learning 3 languages from immigrant parents who are not financially literate, and I still got to go to school every day between 2 different worlds and still be normal. You see what I'm saying? And so that was my plight.
No, I understand.
Broken down helped me get by.
Sure. No, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I didn't think that we're in conflict. What the point I want to get across is that this is an insurrectionary moment, right? And in an insurrectionary moment, right, you got to go for something big, right? I understand all the community organizing you're talking about. Definitely very important, has to be done. And but what I'm saying is, look at the national attention, right, that Black people in America have right now. This is a special moment. And so if you need something big done, now is the time.
Strike it while it's hot.
Exactly. Because if this moment passes and you don't take
We may have to wait another 4 years.
come back. So it is a special moment.
So how do we strike, and what do we strike?
Well, I want to say, I do want. That's a question that I wanted to bring up, because this part right here, I want to come close to the end, but I also want to come up with actual solutions to these issues that we've come across today, and this discussion that we come across today. Well, first, I want to say to Ashlee, how do we elevate this issue, or elevate the solution within our Black community? How do you see there are opportunities where you have traveled within your spaces for the Black community to be heard, and to increase and to spread and reinvest into our community? Is she still here?
We might have lost her.
Oh,
Do you think? I was gonna say, Professor Henry, do you think that the only way that the Black voice can be heard or something can be done is during an insurrection? Is there no other median way for this to take place?
No, of course, there's a lot that goes on in non-insurrectionary periods. Every society, you always have these insurrectionary periods. And as I said, think of the uprisings in France that we had in January. French workers took to the streets, right? They felt as though, with what was happening with neoliberalism, they were being squeezed, and squeezed in a way that the normal channels and the normal modes of organizing were not working. And so when people go insurrectionary, it's because they have reached a limit. They have tried and tried the established channels, and they're not getting anywhere. They feel a lot of pain, right? And so here it is. We have created
there's so much that we want, and there's so much that needs to be changed. So much, right? We can name them all on 10 fingers, but I'm gonna take a seat back. Professor, if you were to choose 3 things, what are those things to ask and change? Because we can have conversations all day, we can have discussions and say superlatives, but like you said, right, if we're going to strike, then that means we need to strike with confidence, with assurance, and with comfortability that what we are requesting sets the tone for where we're going. What would you identify
Okay.
How do we get there?
3 things I would ask for right now, given
Ashlee's
this
back.
insurrectionary moment. 1, I would like to see the equivalent of a Marshall Plan for Black economic development. I would like to see us and, the institutions of the federal government, right, put out a plan, a serious plan for Black economic development. Look at it. We had the crisis on Wall Street. What did the chairman of the Fed say? We are prepared to do anything. We will print whatever amount of money it will take. Wall Street will not fail.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I want somebody to say, take that attitude towards Black economic development. Right? It can be done. Developing black economy won't cost trillions and trillions of dollars.
We know it can be done, but will it be done?
No, and that's what I'm saying is this is what the insurrectionary moment is all about. It is the only time that you can make such a demand and get a hearing.
So
In
if we
normal
can,
times, you cannot make this demand and get a serious hearing. My second, no, he asked me to identify 3 things. So let me do the 3
Okay.
things, right? Clearly, after this, there has to be serious police reform, right? And I think there are a lot of good ideas about how to reform the police. And then my third thing that we should ask for right now is that we end and remove the Electoral College. Look at it. Hillary Clinton won this last election, by 3 million votes, right? But she's not the president. We have this ancient institution we call the Electoral College. This is why Donald Trump is president. Right? Look at the disaster. Look at the consequences of that intervention by the Electoral College. The
well,
people.
Professor, we have Ashlee back. I did get to hear your 3 points, and those are very valid points, and I do want to discuss that and get into more practical actions that we can take and develop here. But because Ashlee is back, I do want to pose this question to her. Is the feeling on the ground when we talk about politics and when we talk about to our desire to want to change things within politics, do people have faith in and having those achievements come, or are people more about tear it down, let's find and figure out a better way that we can do it ourselves, or do they feel so disenfranchised with the system that it's like, let's do it ourselves?
I feel like it's more like the latter. Let's tear it down and figure out what we're going to do. So one thing that the city council did today, they had an emergency meeting to see if they could dismantle the police department. Something that a lot of grassroots organizations have been doing here in this city. They've been saying this for years. They're like, the police, they're brutalizing us. They're brutalizing Black and brown people. We need to get rid of this force, transform it, do whatever we need to do. So a lot of people don't have faith necessarily in their politicians. They don't have faith in the structure that's already put before them. They think it's tainted, which it probably is. And there's no point in trying to fix it. Like right now, for example, I spoke to a lot of protesters and they were saying there's no need to give psyche evals or to do some of the things that people have proposed you do with law enforcement. It's more like just get rid of them and let's start from the beginning, because these people already have that fraternity mindset in place, or it's like, I got to protect my brother, Blue Lives Matter. Like, this doesn't matter if you give me a psych eval or not. I'm gonna think this way because this is how I've been programmed to think.
Buffalo's the best example of that with those 57
Yes.
The best example. You push over a senior citizen, his head literally falls out on the ground, and you hear somebody say he's bleeding out of his ear, and then 57 officers are frustrated that they felt like this is too much, and then they all left. That's fine and dandy, but that psych
Wait, they left?
completely needed.
I don't understand. They left?
Well, they put in their 2 weeks notice. They resigned.
57 officers resigned in Buffalo, New York,
Yeah.
for the old man that was
Pushed over, whose head hit the ground, and literally blood was coming out of his ears.
Oh,
And
wow.
one of the officers who pushed
And
him
they
over-
resigned to show support for the police officer that did that and is under now interrogation or whatever the case is.
Right.
He's been suspended without pay. But one of the officers, there were two officers basically that knocked him down, and one of the officers, who I guess did most of the knocking down, tried to assist him, and then another officer stopped him from trying to assist. And so that's like the mindset. It's sad because, I mean, watching that video, I'm not related to that man. This isn't a black or white issue. This is an individual who wasn't posing a threat at all to the police. There was it was a Black Lives Matter protest occurring over police brutality. And these people literally brutalized this man at a protest. Like, that speaks volumes. These people have power. These people don't care about humanity. You're not rocking a badge. You don't look like us. We're going to do whatever we want to do. We're going to get away with it most of the time. But that was despicable. It pissed me off to no end when I watched that video.
So then that kind of brings me right back. It brings us right back full circle to the beginning of this discussion when we talk about basically what the last generation or the older generations want to accomplish within the system. Like, I hear all the time, we need to vote for this, we need to vote for that. But in the younger generation, we're me, myself included, and on down, I'd say, or anybody within my age range and on down, all feel like we've been seeing the same thing and attempting the same thing over and over and over and over again. We're making calls for things to be dismantled. We want the Electoral College to be done with. It's not like it's a new question or a new statement or a new form of realization. So how do we keep asking for the same thing? And we all know the saying about in science, how can you expect different results performing the same experiment? That's the definition of insanity. So I think people constantly feel like, is everybody insane? So if we're in a state where we feel like we can't go to this system that obviously has this immense amount of power and immense amount of authority and immense amount of resources, how do we go to that system? And if not go to that system, what do we do? And I'll pose this to the doctor. What do we do if we cannot go to the system and say, we want these reforms to happen, we want these changes to happen? And how can we create? What do we start working on right now as to put forward so that we can create this economic progression for our Black community?
Yeah. Okay. Now, as I said, we have to have some alternative, some clear alternative. So as I was listening to Ashlee, she began to say, well, we have to dismantle the police, right?
Right.
And
Well, that's what the people are saying.
yeah, but if you dismantle the police, then what are you going to put in its place? So we need to say, okay, I want to dismantle the police, but at the same time, you also have to say, well, okay, here's a new idea about keeping order. Whatever we want to call it, we need to think about that. Other than that, when you go before people who have the power to legislate, and they say to you, well, what do you want? You have to be able to say, this is what I want, right? And so we need to think about some alternative system of keeping order. You know, people do commit crimes, you know?
I strongly...
And that's real. And so we could ask ourselves the question about, why do people commit crimes, right? And what can we do to reduce the motivations to make people commit crimes? We can look at all of these issues, right? So I understand impulse the policing is bad at the moment. We definitely need to reform it. And that's why, as I said, I put it on my number 2. So we have to sit down and think about what's the alternative to the present system.
So
Right?
this is actually this is a perfect segue because I actually do have an idea. Then there was something that I spent some time wondering about as well, thinking that we needed some sort of alternative. What if we were able to vote in our own elected police within our own city council, so that we know we have a system and we have an academic system where it's centered on teaching these spiritual and moral um, values that we should have as people, as human beings, and also um, these people are coming through a system that we've already prepared to patrol our own neighborhoods. So if we have an alternative that we can uh, present and invest in when it comes to creating a structure where we allow people to put our own educational system, then we can actually dismantle the police system that already exists, the federal police system or the statewide police system, and then start investing in our own community. Is that something that is tangible?
Well, we only know whether something is tangible or not until we try it. We have lots of good ideas, but then we have to try it. First on a small scale, and then on a larger scale, and see if it works. So, this is a good place to start. It's very similar to some ideas that people had in the 1960s, when they would talk about community policing, right?
Mhm.
And it would be good if we're going to propose that now. See, well, what were some of the issues with community policing? Again, the Black Panther Party have gone through all of this. I mean, they have spent more time thinking about issues of policing, I think, than anybody. So we need to sit down, read, and find out some of what they thought, because this issue of police brutality was something that they took up and dealt with in a way that I don't think anybody else has. Huh?
Mhm.
Uh, so as I said, it's always good to know what happened, what people tried before, what went wrong, what were the weaknesses, what were the strengths, and then try to build on those. Try to go forward, because we are not the first people to have to undertake this challenge of trying to find better ways of policing our communities.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming in today and sitting down and having this discussion. I'm writing this down because this is actually very, very useful and something that we can put and invest in, put our energy in and invest in these ideas here. So I'm glad we got to sit down and discuss and flesh out some of these issues and some of these sentiments. So again, thank you, Ashlee, for joining us. I want to thank Ms. Rizvan for she's gone now, but for giving us her energy and her time and her space. Dr. Henry, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm definitely going to pick your mind some more about this topic. Mr. Thomas, absolutely. Thank you for providing all of these very insightful and meaningful notions of thought, and we are going to explore a lot more of these and sit down and start organizing some of these things because
Yeah,
I think we're on the start and on the way
and
to create.
I'll just leave with this 2 words. I know we always ask ourselves, what can we do to enact change, and how can we move forward? Um, just plain and simple, some of the things that I'm doing personally. Um, I'm on the board of school systems that provide to children who are less unfortunate. I volunteer consistently within my community. I'm in the midst of launching a new 501c called Winners Impact. And we're also going to be launching in the fall Doers City, which is a program that anyone across the world could be a part of. And it's just about you being a neighbor to whatever zip code you're in. I just really feel like there are larger things that need to be taken care of, but there are also the small crumb bites, which I happen to be okay with right now, that I can continue picking up and being impactful each and every day with whoever I meet, how I choose to converse, or me sharing the Black Bank in Harlem. And hopefully many people go and just open it up with $10 or $15. 3,000 people do that. It's a huge change and a huge uplift to our want for Black economy, right?
Absolutely.
Want to understand the impact of the Black dollar, go to Nielsen's.com and put in African American spending. You'll see some real ideals. You'll know that we as Black people spend a lot of time on body stuff because our skin is different. So we need to find the right things, right? But that also means that we're very good business people. So
Right.
if you have a great idea, start it. If you need to understand what business to start, understand what affects it and what your community wants the most out of, and create for your community. Those are just some small, basic things that we can do every day before we're able to change the legislations that we want, as the professor said, before we make a movement and we disable or dismantle as other people want. We can't dismantle what we don't fully understand, right? And so I'm not going to tear down any police department because being a police officer at the end of the day is not easy. I have brothers that have done wars of duty in Iraq. I have cousins that are officers. They don't police in their own community because it is dangerous as an officer to be seen in your own community policing, and then the wrong person knows where you live. So you often will get a Queens person in Long Island or a Suffolk County person in Harlem, and those are the reasons. I do think testing is required to some degree, but ultimately, harsher disciplinary codes need to exist for officers in general. When it
Let's
comes
explore.
to
Let's explore more of that
maybe,
outside of this conversation too. I want to
absolutely.
outside of the discussion, so I definitely want to flesh that out. Ashlee, did you have anything to add to the end of this discussion?
No, I missed some of it because I had to take a call.
Mm,
But I love what Thomas was saying earlier about how this train is moving and it's important to ride this movement. And like you asked me earlier, why are people still protesting? I mean, the officers were arrested, but it's like there's more, as you know. There's more that's going on. There's still back to the systemic racism. There's a lot that's happening in Minneapolis and across the world, and these people want to bring about change. So they're going to continue protesting until they get what they want.
mm,
Yeah.
blessings, Professor.
Well, thank you. I'll close by saying thank you for organizing this. I thought it was very informative, and I strongly suggest that you keep on doing what you're doing. This is the kind of activity that I think is appropriate for the moment,
Mm,
right? And so, yeah, congrats to you, man. And anytime, just let me know,
thank you.
and
Thank you
I'll
so
be here.
much. Absolutely.
And
Thank you
thank
so
you
much.
guys too. It was lovely meeting you guys. You guys are really awesome. Hopefully we get to meet in person someday.
Absolutely.
For sure.
So we're going to end our live stream here, but I want to thank everybody who has tuned in. I know we had some technical difficulties throughout, but it's okay. I know that everyone wanted to spend their energy and learn something today. We're going to have the end of the stream on in clips throughout our YouTube. You can go to Black Caucus Movement on Facebook and on Instagram, black.caucus.movement on Instagram, and you can donate to our Patreon. And so that you can see some of these ideas come to life just by donating. Thank you very much, and God bless all of you who have come and shared this space with me and who are on and watching today. So we're going to end the live stream there. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
All right, Jez, you guys don't have to leave. We can